Well, I want to welcome all of you here tonight to the second meeting of the Quarry Club. We are pleased to have with us tonight George Craig, who's going to present his paper on the Pony Express. George?
Let's begin. From St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California, the Pony Express could deliver faster than ever before. In operation for only 18 months between April 1860 and October 1861, the Pony Express nevertheless has become synonymous with the Old West. In the era before electronic communication, the Pony Express was a thread that tied the East to the West. In July 2010, an obscure company called Spread Networks issued a news release. Round-trip travel time from Chicago to New Jersey had been cut to 13 milliseconds. On March 26, 1860, there appeared simultaneously a notice and advertisement in the St. Louis Republic and the New York Herald to San Francisco in 8 days by the Central Overland, California and Pikes Peak Express Company. The first courier, the Pony Express, will leave the Missouri River on Tuesday, April 3rd at 5 p.m. and will run regularly weekly the year after, carrying letter mail only. The notice includes other information to include collection points and times, St. Joseph, Missouri, and locations in New York and Washington City, and a delivery location in San Francisco, as well as specific waypoints. Thus, the Pony Express was launched and would provide such service for 18 months, ultimately overcome by the telegraph and the Transcontinental Railroad. I've included the Spread Network notes because it illustrates that the timely transmittal of information remains as important today as it was 150 years ago, and the need for information was met by innovation. Spread Network's founder, Dan Spivey, with an investment of $300 million, built a fiber optic line between two data centers, Chicago and New York, after he realized that the theoretical trading speed, taking advantage of a spread in pricing between the two markets available to stock traders, could be faster than the existing speed. The leasing of the existing resolving fiber optic line, which was 827 miles long, could be financially rewarding for investors backing Spivey and for the banks and brokerages buying his service. Spread Network is bought out and continues to offer dot fiber and lit services between Greater New York and Greater Chicago metropolitan areas. The network now offers 12.9 millisecond round-trip transmission on a dedicated dark fiber optic line and 14 milliseconds round-trip transmission via wavelengths. I assume that's via microwave and shared fiber optics. Before we discuss the birth, life, and rather rapid dissolution of the Pony Express, it might be useful to look at the historical settings in the United States and California in the late 1840s and 1850s. Gold was discovered in California in January 1848, and with the ensuing boom, California was admitted to the Union in the summer of 1850 as a free state. The Dred Scott decision was issued in 1858. Our nation was in turmoil. Indeed, there were competing factions in California, pro-slavery and anti-slavery. By the census of 1860, California's population had grown to 380,000. If you add the population of Oregon, Washington, the territories of Nevada and Utah, the total western states and territories population in 1860 was nearly 500,000. The 1847 Mormon exodus to Utah and the thousands who moved west on the Oregon Trail starting in the 1840s also contributed to the growth of population in the West. Congress recognized the need to communicate with the American West and attempted subsidies to encourage mail and transportation to this remote constituency. But But more was at stake in these areas. There was a significant concern that California would become anti-union. By the same token, its population was hungry for news regarding that smoldering fire that was to become the Civil War. The safest mode of mail service was by ship. One option for mail was by steamship from New York City or other East Coast city to Panama. Disembark and walk a pack mule across the insect and disease-infested isthmus, and then load it back onto a cargo ship to San Francisco. Ship trips took at least 8 weeks if the safer, from a health aspect, route around Cape Horn was used. The U.S. Postal Service had already established a network of postal services throughout the West that eventually received mail from its San Francisco distribution point. Even with this, a letter typically took 3 to 4 weeks to reach its destination. Overland transportation and mail service was provided by various wagon trains, with travelers providing their own wagons or stagecoaches that used either a southern route or a central route, avoiding the mountainous ranges of the northern routes that were susceptible to massive snowfalls, patch closures, and Indian attacks perhaps. To encourage connections to the West, Congress awarded contracts to carry the mail to the seabound carriers. It was not a profitable venture for the government, for the Postal Service. For instance, one contract cost over $700,000. The post office received about $200,000 in revenue. The first attempt at overland service was made in 1851 by two enterprising young men, George Traporting and Absalom Woodward. They established a government-backed service between Salt Lake City and Sacramento, California. Another entrepreneur, Samuel H. Woodson, created service between Salt Lake City and Independence, Missouri, for which he also received a government subsidy. While these aforementioned enterprises reduced the time of delivery to a shorter time than ship-delivered mail, it was fraught with problems, including significant winter weather and the aforementioned Indian attacks. The Pony Express is said to have its origins in a horse ride traveling from California to Washington of Senator William Gwin, G-W-I-N, of California. And during a portion of that trip, Mr. Benjamin F. Ficken, a general superintendent of the freight and stagecoach firm of Russell Majors and Woodell of Leavenworth, Kansas, who accompanied Senator Ficken on his Senator Gwin on his eastward journey, and took that opportunity to relate his idea of establishing a mail service from Missouri to the West Coast to the senator. Ficken is said to have worked in overland transportation for many years and had several ideas to improve the stagecoach service. He was also very ambitious. His enthusiasm must have been contagious, as the senator introduced specific legislation in 1855 to establish a weekly letter express service between St. Louis and San Francisco. The express was to operate on a 10-day schedule and was to receive $500 per round trip, while the senator introduced a bill each year regarding that establishment of the letter service. For 5 consecutive years, it was killed by being referred to the Committee on Military Affairs. Does that sound familiar? I would expect that the Congress had more important issues on its mind. Civil War, anybody? Well, Ficklin's idea of a horse-relay service was not an original one, as the great Chinese conqueror Genghis Khan had developed such a system in which riders rode between stations set about 25 miles apart. According to Marco Polo, a single rider using such stations could ride 300 miles in a single day. Indeed, some of the literature suggests other origins for the Pony Express. As far back as 1849, Henry O'Reilly pitched a proposal to Illinois Senator Stephen A. Douglas to build a telegraph line between St. Louis and California. O'Reilly proposed a series of substations, or stockades, each manned by about 20 soldiers. The stockades would shelter the construction crews while the telegraph line was being built. Regardless of who came up with the idea first, it was William H. Russell who, to use a horse analogy, took the bit and ran with it. In January 1860, Russell met with Senator Gwynn and eventually was promised that the firm would be awarded a government contract which required that express deliveries start at the beginning of April of that same year. Russell's partners, Alexander Majors and William B. Waddell, were hardly enthusiastic about the idea when Russell announced he'd already committed the partnership. One of the problems was that the firm had a good government contract, which the government never paid on. So they were in dire financial straits and thought that by taking this effort on, they would then get a new government contract. However, Majors and Waddell agreed that the verbal agreement of Russell would be honored. Indeed, they knew that they would lose money at the outlet of the service, even though they charged $5 for a half-ounce letter, and later they would cut that price to $2.50 for a quarter-ounce letter. No big deal. The three partners created a new entity to operate the Pony Express, the Central Overland, California and Pikes Peak Express Company, which was incorporated with additional stockholders B.F. Ficken, F.A.B., W.W. Finney, and John S. Jones. The firm of Russell, Majors, and Waddell had been in existence and had its origin in a venture founded by Russell in 1848. It enjoyed a successful business and good reputation with the government, carrying military goods to the western forts like Fort Riley. At least one writer described the firm in these terms. They were the Mayflower van lines of their times, the United Parcel Service of the prairie, the FedEx of the frontier. The Freetown founders could not have been more different. Russell was a lineal descendant of Lord William Russell, an English lord. While originally from Vermont, Russell started his career in the West working for a mercantile firm in Missouri and later started his own dry goods store. You can see that Missouri was kind of the gateway to the West. He was said to have a quick temper, but remained a New England gentleman in speech and manner. Recognizing the need to supply the many forts as well as Santa Fe, he organized a wagon train and then another and then another. He joined with James Brown and John S. Jones to haul 600,000 pounds of military supplies along the Santa Fe Trail to Santa Fe. He prospered. He remained in Lexington, Kentucky, where he built a 20-room mansion. He'd already organized an insurance business and helped establish a women's school, the Lexington Female Collegiate Institute. Marrying the daughter of a Baptist minister, he was a member of the Lexington Baptist Church, where he met his future partner, William Waddell, who coincidentally was an investor in the insurance company. Waddell's family had its roots in Scotland. After his marriage to Susan Byron, which included a large dowry, Waddell used his experience as a store clerk to start a small dry goods store in Sewickley, Kentucky. The store prospered, but Waddell cashed out, moving to Lexington, Kentucky. And started a new store, which also prospered because of Waddell's business acuity. After Russell worked for Waddell's own firm and Waddell's partner died, the two formed Waddell and Russell. 4 years later, they merged with their freight competitor, Alexander Majors, to form the firm of Russell, Majors, and Waddell. Russell was described as being an opportunist, and Waddell was content to be the man behind the scenes, as well as a stabilizing force behind the business. Alex Major was a product of the West, and was really the operations manager of the firm. Alex Major was considerably different from his partners in that he was not wealthy. Raised on a dirt poor farm, he was from hardworking, plain-talking folks who shared Christian values. He was raised in a one-window log cabin his father built in Missouri, and had operated the family farm for 5 months at age 13 when his father left with other settlers to look for silver. He married in 1834. After returning from a war against Mexico, he had been wounded. He figured out there was not enough income from running a small farm, and he developed a sideline of transporting his neighbor's crops to the local market in Independence, Missouri. The sideline grew into a well-respected freight company, eventually headquartered in Leavenworth, Kansas. All right, but turning to the task at hand, starting a mail service in 3 months with horses and riders across most of the United States. What was needed to achieve this rather ambitious goal? Obviously, riders, horses, relay stations, and men to operate them, and finally a route across the prairie, deserts, plains, and through mountains and along rivers. I've obtained a map of the route. Where'd you put it?
We already passed it. We looked at it.
That shows all of the relay stations. The route went through Indian country. By agreement among the partners, William Russell took over management of the Eastern Division, the route between St. Joe and Salt Lake City. The experienced and new stockholder, Mr. Benjamin F. Ficken, took over the middle of the trail, and W.W. Finney became responsible for the western end. Major's extensive experience proved useful in acquiring existing companies and their relay stations, riders, and horses. Knowing that a healthy horse could typically run at a gallop for 8 to 12 miles, the developers need to place stations at strategic locations for its riders to change mounts. Existing stage stations and road branches on the eastern end of the route would meet their needs, but new relay stations would have to be built in remote western areas. Horses in the eastern area were purchased from the Army. When I read that, I thought to myself, was it government surplus? More were from thoroughbred stock. Horses beyond Salt Lake City were known as Californians, brought to the West by Spanish missionaries. Descended from Iberian stock, Californians barely stood higher than 14.2 hands, which is about 4.5 feet tall. Excuse me, their size may have been the source of the name Pony Express. I never did find anybody in all the literature I read that could explain how they came up or who came up with the name Pony Express. The average cost per horse was about $200. The firm acquired the best horses available. One item not mentioned was a saddlebag for holding and carrying the mail. And one of those books, these books, may have a picture of it. It's of Mexican origin. It was called a mochila. It had 4 pouches and featured a hole in the front center of the blanket, which held the pockets for the mail, that the rider would put the saddle horn through and be able to remove it as the rider changed horses. The saddle itself was lighter than a typical saddle since weight was a critical factor. The combination of saddle, bridle, and mochila did not weigh more than 13 pounds. In addition, the letters were written on very thin paper. Alex Major was active. He purchased up to 500 Mustang horses, hired 200 men to man his station, and signed up to 80 riders to begin the first run of the pony. Major was truly an operating partner in this venture. The initial cost for all these arrangements was over $72,000. The advertisement for the riders, you can pass around, read, of course, wanted young, skinny, and wiry fellows, not over 18, must be expert riders, willing to risk death daily, orphans preferred, wages $25 per week. While at least one historian doubts the poster was ever issued, and the term Pony Express may not have been adopted, but they apparently had plenty of applicants. As Russell and some authors say was Major, was devout, he required each writer to subscribe to the following oath: I, blank blank, do hereby swear before the great and living God, that during my engagement and while an employee of Russell, Majors, and Waddell, I will under no circumstance use profane language, that I will drink no intoxicating liquor, that I will not quarrel or fight with any other employee of the firm, and that in every respect I will conduct myself honestly, be faithful to my duties, and so direct all my acts as to win the confidence of my employers. So help me God. Furthermore, each rider and each way station was issued a special calf-bound edition of the Bible, supplied by the American Bible Society. Of course, riders were known to backslide from the pledge. The Bible was not typically at the forefront of their reading list, and enforcement was a little bit difficult in this sparsely populated wilderness. But Majors, as one of the principals, gave it his best, and it helped. Note, now, the St. Joseph, Missouri Pony Express Museum indicates it was Russell that required growth. When asked about the discrepancy, the answer given was all three of the principals were devout. On April 3rd, 1860, about a year before the beginning of the Civil War, Major Jeff Thompson, who was the mayor of St. Joseph, Missouri, addressed a crowd of onlookers at the Pike Peaks Livery Station, stables in St. Joe, to the crowd who had gathered to help launch the express. Thompson, who would later become a general for the Confederacy, noted in his speech that the railroad would eventually supplant the need for the overland mail service, but that this day was a landmark for St. Joseph, Missouri. A similar gathering and launch took place at the San Francisco end. The first pouch containing 49 letters, 5 telegrams, and miscellaneous papers was handed to a rider, said to be a guy named Johnny Fry, but again, historians differ. The train carrying the letter was 2 hours late, and there was a substantial effort made by the engineer of that train to get it into St. Joe. At 7:15 p.m., a cannon was fired, and the rider bowled off to a waiting ferry boat to cross the Missouri River. The Pony Express was set to provide a fresh horse every 10 to 15 miles and a fresh rider every 75 to 100 miles. 75 horses were needed in total to make a one-way trip. The average speed was 10 miles per hour. On April 9th at 6:45 p.m., the first rider from the east reached Salt Lake City. Then on April 12th, the mail pouch reached Carson City, Nevada at 2:30 p.m. The riders raced over the Sierra Nevada mountains, through Placerville, California, and on to Sacramento. About midnight on April 14th, 1860, the first mail pouch was delivered via the Pony Express to San Francisco. It was truly an American spirit that resulted in the 10-day mail service between the coaches, as opposed to more than 21 days by stagecoach or water. as Mark Twain remembered in his account of his own stagecoach trip through the West. Here he comes. Every neck is stretched further, and every eye strained wider. Away across the endless dead level of the prairie is a black speck appears against the sky, and it's plain that it moved. Well, I should think so. In a second or two, it becomes a horse and rider, rising and falling, rising and falling, weaving towards us nearer and nearer, growing more and more distinct, more and more sharply defined, nearer and still nearer, and the flutter of the hoofs come fairly to the ear. Another instant, a whoop and a hurrah from our upper deck, a wave of the rider's hand, but not a reply. A man and a horse burst past our excited faces and goes winging away like a belated fragment of a storm. It was, of course, a Pony Express rider, one of over 200 who carried mail on the 2,000-mile route between St. Joe and Sacramento, California. Men with names like Lafayette Bowie, Gigi San Giovanni, Buffalo Bill Cody, and with nicknames like Irish Tom and Pony Bob. All right. Well, as Paul Harvey once said, here's the rest of the story. Benjamin F. Ficklin quit his job with Russell's Major and Waddell as general superintendent 3 months after it started and worked for a telegraph company for a short period. He joined the Confederate Army, became an officer, and was a hero. Plagued by asthma, Ficklin took a desk job and was sent to England to buy war materials for the Confederacy. A month before General Robert E. surrendered at Appomattox, the Confederates sent Ficklin to Washington to see President Lincoln. While he waited for an audience, what happened? Lincoln was assassinated. Ficklin was arrested and was thought to be a conspirator and sent to jail for 2 months. He was finally cleared of the charges. 4 years after starting a mail and stage service in Texas, Ficklin returned to Washington on business. He was having dinner when a fish bone became lodged in his throat. While a doctor was trying to remove it, the forceps slipped and cut an artery. On March 10th, 1871, Ficklin, who was involved in the thick of things from the War of Mexico, Overland freight, stage travel, the Pony Express, the telegraph, the Civil War, and Lincoln's assassination, blended in. Billy Fisher was a rider from the Salt Lake City area. In the winter of 1861, while making his run, he encountered a blinding blizzard. Fisher was tired from the effects of the storm. At one point, he dismounted and sat by a tree. He started to fall asleep. Then something jumped on his leg and started licking him in the face. Fisher was awakened and found a rabbit staring at him in the face. The moment startled Fisher, and the rabbit scampered away. Fisher said if the rabbit didn't do what he did, he may have never awakened and might have frozen to death in his sleep. He called it an act of providence. Fisher's great-great-grandson, William Fisher, is also an adventurer of sorts. He is an astronaut who flew in the space shuttle. Bronco Charlie Miller claimed to have been the youngest rider for the Pony Express. One day in Sacramento, a rider was needed. Miller says his father told the station keeper his 11-year-old son knows the route and then helped him on the horse, ushering him off. Miller said he was then hired as a rider. Miller, along with Pony Bob Haslam and other riders, would go on to work in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. He came to be the last Pony Express rider before it shut down, and did outlive all other riders, dying at the age of 105 in 1955.
Wow.
James Butler, Wild Bill Hickok, never worked as a rider, only worked as a stock tender. Reason being he was older and heavier than the other riders, An incident at Rock Creek Station was the beginning of a career for Hickok as a gunfighter, lawman, and gambler. He was good friends with Buffalo Bill and did perform in his Wild West show for a brief period. Hickok would later move to Deadwood, South Dakota, where he was murdered while playing cards in a saloon. Spread Network is still a private company that offers dark fiber and lit services between Greater New York and Chicago. Launched in 2010, the network now offers 12.9 millisecond round trip. I think I said that before. Russell Majors and Waddell's firm fell apart eventually after the end of the Pony Express. They never did get a government contract. In March 1862, Stagecoach King Ben Holliday took over the company. Waddell returned home to Lexington, Missouri. Broke and terribly in debt, Waddell sold his home to his son for $1 and continued to live there. Waddell was badly affected by one of his sons' death during the Civil War. William B. Waddell never worked in business again and died on April 1st, 1872. The 48-year-old Russell went to New York and failed as a stockbroker because of a bond scandal. No one would trust him. Russell filed bankruptcy on April 3rd, 1865, exactly 5 years since that first writer left St. Joseph. His assets were sold off to pay creditors. He returned to Missouri by way of family because of failing health. William H. Russell died at the age of 60 on September 10th, 1872. Alex Majors fared little better than his other partners, but not by much. In 1865, living in Kansas City, Majors sold what assets he had left. He did author a book, 70 Years on the Frontier. That concludes the paper. Some of the research for this paper came from the internet, and an excellent set of pages from St. Joseph, Missouri's Pony Express Museum. In addition, the trail of the Pony Express has been incorporated into a national road created by the National Park Service. And there is an internet site as well. Any questions? Yes.
Did many of the young men, boys die? Like said,
They actually only had one die from Indian.
from Indians?
Yeah.
What were the economics of the Pony Express? You said at one point that they'd spent $72,000 to get it set.
Yeah, and they had, look at their payroll, $25 a rider. They had over 200 riders. And they were getting, how much?
$5.
$5 a letter.
But I don't know.
They were averaging about 100 letters a trip. They had a max of about 700, but they were averaging about 100.
Just quickly, what was the length? Because it wasn't as long as people think. The length of time that from when it started to when it ended.
18 months.
Yeah, I thought it was
Is that
like
all?
a year and a half. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's a lot
From
of work.
1860 to 1862, somewhere?
61.
61.
Wow.
You think it's longer, like
Well, there was a
because
great
we
TV
know
show.
about it. You know,
Was there? Yeah.
what's
I know, there was a great TV show. Not as great as Rawhide, but it was the Pony Express. This is in the 60s. I'm dating myself, but anyway.
I remember Rawhide.
When was the Transcontinental Railroad completed so that mail wouldn't be needed on the Pony Express?
I forget.
That was the 1870s.
So a while after.
Yeah, so it must have been
So
a
what
time
did they do
period.
in between?
Right.
They went
that's
back
what
to
And
the
telegraph.
boats. Huh?
And telegraph.
Oh,
Where
that's
who
right.
used it? Were these people mom writing to the sun, or was this businesses?
A lot of,
No, I
mostly
think
a lot
this
of
was
governmental
commerce.
stuff and business.
Commerce.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. You're not gonna pay $5
Right.
in 1860 with
That was a lot of money, yeah.
Right.
There were messages from, the mayor of San Francisco
Mm-hmm.
to this delegation,
Okay.
that kind of stuff.
How far is St. Joseph from St. Louis?
I would pay $5 today for
As far as
Yeah, we-
St. Joseph from St. Louis, I'm not familiar with St. Joseph, but you would have thought St. Louis was the hub
Yeah,
where it would have started. I don't
Well, like the gateway to the west kept moving. I mean, Pittsburgh was the gateway to the west, and then St. Louis was, and then Kansas City. My brother lives in Kansas City, and so I know a little bit about the wagon trains that would start out from there. So I don't know past there.
Right, I just
what
don't
would
know
be the
anything
next
about
one?
St. Joseph, why. I
Yeah,
would have thought it would start
Yeah.
in St. Louis or
Yeah.
Kansas City or something.
yeah.
Well, it is close to Kansas City.
Is it? Okay.
St. Joseph is,
Okay.
as this one goes.
That's an amazing number of
How did
stops.
Wells Fargo get the idea that they were funny?
I think it must have bought out Ben Holiday. There's a picture of Montreal.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Who?
The satchel.
The satchel.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's not, you said that held 100 letters?
Yeah.
On thin paper, remember?
That's in there,
And they would
Not having them a book.
wrap the letters in oilskin
Mm-hmm.
to keep them